Hi, my name's Gaz, the Mini Painting Punk, and in this video we're going to paint the finest miniature in the land, only bigger. So when I got started painting miniatures, it wasn't through Warhammer or Warhammer 40k, didn't have any Space Marines, didn't have any Eldar, I only had my wits, my broadsword, and the greatest game ever made.
Heroquest.
To those of you not familiar, Heroquest was a game brought out by Milton Bradley in partnership with Games Workshop in 1989. It was an epic swords and sorcery dungeon crawling adventure to play with your friends, and it was my first introduction to fantasy miniatures, and that's really stuck with me, and my first introduction to Games Workshop. And I've got a lot of fond memories of Heroquest, and one of my biggest regrets is that I didn't take better care of my copy of Heroquest. A lot of the miniatures have disappeared into the void. Any of the ones that are still left aren't in the best condition. Now you can find these online, they run quite expensive, but luckily for me, a user on Thingiverse called Marcus Carlbark has taken detailed scans and uploaded 3D models of pretty much all the models from Heroquest for anyone to be able to download and print, which is amazing. So I thought, what would be cooler than the finest miniature in the land, the Gargoyle? A bigger Gargoyle, and that's what I'm going to paint today. So here's my printed Gargoyle, undercoated in red. He's scaled up to 2 times the original size. You'll see there's some green stuff work there where I filled in some of the gaps where I split the print to make it easier to print, and you'll also see there's some print lines on there, and all that means for painting is that we're not going to be relying so heavily on things like washes and dry brushes, as they tend to show the print lines. When we do use those techniques, they'll be done in a bit more of a deliberate and targeted way. So the Gargoyle is very similar to the original Warhammer Bloodthirster model. I'm not sure which came first. If you know, you can let me know in the comments. I wanted to go for that sort of bright red demonic skin. We're going to start off with a bit of airbrushing, and all I'm doing with this, as I'm still getting to grips with the tool, is just some basic shading and highlighting. So I'm going to spray all the recesses with a darker red and then work up to a lighter red on all the raised areas, and that'll just give me a bit of a head start on the skin tones when we move over onto the brushwork. The first thing I did with the paintbrush was just to take a really bright red and just to pick up the uppermost highlights, so places like the face, the top edges of the muscles, his fingers, and the raised parts of the wings. The next step was a targeted crimson wash. Now usually when painting a mini, I would apply the wash to all of the red areas. The reason I do it like this is because it's a 3D printed mini, printed on an FDM printer. It has a lot of print lines in there where it's built the layers, and if I was to wash all over, the wash would sink into those lines and just emphasize them a lot. So instead I'm just applying the wash to the very deepest recesses, like between the wings and the lowest parts of the musculature and the deepest parts of the face. Then I just painted some light brown on the teeth and some pink on his licky tongue. I then painted all the armor panels and his shoulder armor in a dark grey colour. Now it's time for that classic gold trim. I would usually paint in a brighter gold and then use a brown wash and highlight from there. Because of the print lines I mentioned before, I started with Balthazar gold, which is a really dark and muted gold. Then painted in all the silver detail, like the chainmail between his legs and the sword. I then put a black wash on those parts and on the grey armour parts as well. I started off with Nuln oil, but it wasn't darkening things down as much as I'd like, and I kind of wanted a lot of contrast with this model, so I used Superwash Black from Coat d'Arms instead, which is a much more opaque black wash. All the gold details were then highlighted with progressively lighter shades of gold, eventually just leading up to a very fine edge highlight with silver. I then used Screaming Skull, which is a bone coloured paint, to pick out all the teeth, leaving the brown in the recesses to work as the shade. I then used the same grey paint that I'd originally used on all the inner armour panels, just to give them some highlights and bring them back up a little bit brighter. This was pretty much the only dry brushing I used on this model, because those parts were quite indented and bumpy anyway, and because it's only on one small part of the model rather than all of it, it didn't really emphasize the print lines too much. I decided I wanted a flame effect on the inner part of the sword and going right across the whip as well. The key to blending the colours with the whip is just having extra water on your paintbrush, more than you'd usually use, and that way when you put the paint on you can create a reasonably smooth blend between the two colours. This is called wet blending. It's not a technique I'm particularly proficient at, but basically just means you're mixing your paints on the model to create a smooth transition between the colours. I've tried it a few times before with mixed results. I think the whip on this one turned out pretty good though. I then just highlighted all the remaining silver parts with a bright silver, so just the sword and the chainmail, and then I was ready to call it a day. But then the postman arrived with some new paints. These are Warcolours highly opaque range. These are some really bright, super opaque paints that I couldn't resist trying out. I had a really nice bright pink and a really nice bright red come, so I couldn't resist just doing a final highlight on all the skin parts and just a little bit of pink on his tongue. And with those bits done, I was ready to call him finished. Sort of. So that's my giant Heroquest Gargoyle / Bloodthirster. I enjoyed this. I enjoyed painting in that old sort of really colourful, oversaturated style. I don't think I've done it perfectly, but I think this guy looks pretty cool. And you might be thinking, he's not finished, he needs a base. And he does need a base, and I've got an idea for the base. It's reasonably ambitious for my standards, so I'm going to do a separate video doing the base next week, hopefully. And it's going to use a lot of these and a little bit of this and a little bit of fabrication. So if you want to see me build the base to this thing, then you can subscribe for the next video. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.